You know, when you think about military history, you picture these grand battles, right? Epic victories, heroic sacrifices. But then there's this one story from Australia back in 1932. It's about a modern army armed with machine guns that declared war on, well, a bunch of birds. Large, flightless birds. And the truly unbelievable part? The birds won. This is the completely true and completely bizarre story of the Great Emu War.
Now listen to this. This wasn't some defeated general talking about a human enemy. This came directly from Major GPW Meredith, the man who was actually leading the whole operation against the emus. His words, they just perfectly capture this strange mix of, I don't know, respect and total frustration that his soldiers were feeling. It really sets the stage for what has to be one of the weirdest conflicts ever. So let's talk about the road to war. It was really a perfect storm. I mean, you have to be asking yourself, how on earth does a modern army find itself in this position? Well, this whole thing didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was the result of a few huge pressures, all coming together at exactly the wrong time in Western Australia. Okay, so it all kind of starts after World War I. Australia wanted to help its returning veterans, so they started these settlement schemes, granting them plots of land. A lot of these guys ended up in the pretty tough, marginal farmland of Western Australia. But right as they're getting started, bam, 1929 happens. The Great Depression hits and the price of wheat just plummets. So these new farmers are already struggling to make ends meet, and then a third crisis shows up. A massive drought inland forces thousands and thousands of emus to migrate right onto their brand new, very fragile farms. So these farmers, they were just pushed to the absolute brink. And remember, a lot of them were ex-soldiers. So when they were thinking about a solution, their minds went back to a tool they knew all too well from the trenches in Europe, the machine gun. So they put together a delegation and went to the Minister of Defense with this, well, it was a very unusual and very desperate request for military help. Next up, the emu invasion, and what an unlikely adversary they turned out to be. Believe it or not, the government actually agreed to the farmers' request, but in doing so, they sent their army to face an enemy that was going to be way, way tougher than anyone could have imagined. Just try to picture this. We're talking about an estimated 20,000 emus. 20,000. They were driven by a massive drought, just relentlessly searching for food and water, and they all descended on this one farming district. For the farmers, you have to understand, this wasn't just a flock of birds passing through. It felt like a full-scale invasion. So you'd think this would be no contest, right? A trained soldier versus a bird. But the emus had some serious advantages. For one, speed. They can run up to 50 kilometers an hour. And their tactics were unconventional. When you shoot at them, they don't just run away in one big, predictable herd. Nope. They scatter into all these small, chaotic groups. It's almost like a guerrilla tactic, and it made them almost impossible to hit with machine guns that were designed to fight organized groups of soldiers. And the threat they posed was very real. The damage they were causing was just catastrophic. They weren't just eating the wheat crops the farmers needed to survive. They were trampling them, spoiling them. But maybe even worse, they were just smashing right through the fences. And this created huge gaps that let another huge pest, rabbits, pour onto the farmland and cause even more destruction. All right, so now we get to the military response. Guns against feathers. Responding to those desperate pleas from the farmers, the Minister of Defense went ahead and formally deployed a unit from the Royal Australian Artillery. The war was officially on. So the force they put together to take on 20,000 emus, it was, let's just say, a little on the small side. It was just 3 men. You had Major Meredith, a sergeant, and 1 gunner. And their entire arsenal to take on this massive flock, 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammo. That's it. And their theater of operations, so to speak, was this vast, wide open, and pretty unforgiving terrain of the Western Australian Wheatbelt. This wasn't going to be some contained firefight. It was a huge, sprawling area where, honestly, the emus held all the cards when it came to space and mobility. So, the campaigns themselves. This really turned out to be an unwinnable war. As soon as the troops were deployed and the engagement started, it became clear, like almost immediately, that standard military tactics were just useless against the emu's natural instincts. That first attempt, boy, was it a masterclass in failure. First, they tried an ambush. The local settlers herded a flock toward the guns, but the birds just
scattered. They split into little groups and ran everywhere. Later, they tried to ambush a much bigger flock, about 1,000 of them, but the machine gun jammed after only killing 12. They even got desperate enough to mount a machine gun on a truck to chase them, but the truck was too slow and the ride was so rough you couldn't possibly aim.
So after about a week of this, let's look at the results. And they are not great. The soldiers had fired something like 2,500 rounds of ammunition. And the total number of confirmed kills? About 50. Just 50 birds. If you do the math, that's an incredible 50 bullets fired for every single emu they took down. The only casualty on the military side was, as the major himself noted in his report, their dignity.
Well, as you can imagine, the whole thing quickly became a national joke. The newspapers were having a field day, mocking the entire operation. Politicians started questioning why the military was even involved. There was even one parliamentarian who joked that they should be awarding medals for bravery to the emus. It was all pretty embarrassing, and the Minister of Defense had no choice but to recall the troops. But here's the thing. Pulling the soldiers out didn't actually solve the problem for the farmers. The emus, of course, just kept on attacking the crops. The pressure mounted again, and so the minister, very reluctantly, approved a second operation. Now this one was a bit more successful. They reported nearly 1,000 kills. But still, it was an incredibly inefficient and very costly way to handle the problem. So let's look at the aftermath, the legacy, and what ended up being the real solution. This so-called war didn't end with a big, decisive victory. It just kind of fizzled out with this quiet understanding that there had to be a better way to do things. And the real solutions, it turns out, were a lot more practical and had nothing to do with the military.
A couple years later, the government tried a totally different approach. They started a bounty system, basically paying people for emu skins. And what this did was it empowered the local farmers to deal with the problem themselves. The results? Well, they really do speak for themselves. You had the military, which managed to kill just under 1,000 birds in a month. Compare that to the bounty system, which saw over 57,000 bounties claimed in only 6 months. A huge difference.
But in the end, the most effective long-term solution wasn't about killing the emus at all. It was about engineering. They built and reinforced these huge networks of vermin-proof fences. And that proved to be the only truly effective way to keep the wandering emus and the settled farmlands apart from each other. So when you look back on it all, what do you think? Is the Great Emu War just a historical comedy, something to laugh about? Or is there maybe a more serious lesson here about our conflicts with the natural world? It's easy to laugh, for sure, but maybe it's also a powerful reminder that no matter how advanced our technology gets, when we try to just force our will on nature, well, the results can be unexpected and sometimes very, very humbling. Thank you so much for joining us for this little dive into what is truly one of the strangest chapters in all of history. We really love digging into fascinating stories just like this one, so if you enjoyed it, please do consider subscribing for more. We hope to see you again very soon. Goodbye for now.